Professor Bolt here with Chapter 7, Tactical Writing Teams. So teams are an important part of lots of things. I have two quotes for this chapter. The first is from Steve Jobs, that his model for business is the Beatles. Four guys who kept each other's kind of negative tendencies in check. They balance each other. The total was much greater than the sum of the parts. That's how he sees business. Great things in business are never done one person. They're done by a team of people. This is just general team stuff. With respect to writing, John TWWIST, writing a story, you understand it's not done by consensus. But we do learn from each other. We remind ourselves how important this work is we're doing. So when you're working on a team, it's not quite like consensus, but there's a lot of value in that team. So going back to our sort of cover graphic, right? This chapter is the big outer edge, team writing and Ren team review, which we'll get into within this chapter in more detail. And I put this on the outside of my target because, in a sense, the team writing and the review process is what holds all the other parts of this together. Storytelling is what's going to keep us on target, but team writing and team reviewing is an important part of keeping it a tight story. So let's look at tactical team writing and getting started. So, we're going to talk about this. You'll be working on some teams in your class, and we're going to explore some of the complexities, benefits, and challenges. Importantly, as the quote said, right, team writing is not about a document by consensus. It is not a democracy. You don't vote on what goes into the document, though you might vote on parts of it and what you like and whatever. That's really providing some input for the people who are making the final decisions. And it's, at the same time, not a bunch of people writing independently. And so when we go to do this, we're going to want to find this balance between trying to do everything by consensus and trying to put the things together one at a time. So I define team writing as a collective effort of individuals on a written project. That's the highest level definition. But our objective is more than just people working on parts of it. We want to leverage the diverse skills and ideas to benefit the organization. And there's a bunch of terms that go with it, and I'm actually going to get into slightly different terms as we go through this. So people call this collaborative writing, group writing, team writing, distributed writing, right? And to me, there's subtle differences. When I use the word group writing, I actually mean something different than when I use the term team writing. We'll get to it in just a second. But in general, our goal is to produce the best possible work. And there's just times when different styles are going to be more suited to the type of projects you're working on. So as I said, I like to see different between teams and groups. Both of them are collections of people, but I consider groups collections of individuals with a less structured relationship. They're the bottom graphic here, right? There are a bunch of people working, and they might even be working towards the same goal, but they're really not working together. So the focus for groups is individual accountability. Teams, on the other hand, have an integrated shared unit. They have a shared goal. They have collective responsibility or accountability. They're all put together. And it's really their interdependence. So the top photo here shows a team where people are actually collaborating at the same time. It's not like you do my part and I'll do yours. And this is important to understand because sometimes people like to think of teams as, oh, we're going to divide up the labor. And there might be parts of it where there's some of that happening, but the value of team writing is the team actually getting together and having a coherent part to what they're trying to do. So the team members really want to leverage their interdependence to build a common vision and voice. And that common vision and voice is some of the things you don't see when you have group writing where you end up with a bunch of individual voices. Team writing requires a higher coordination, communication, and a level of trust. You don't always get what you want or the way you want things to do, so you have to have both coordination, communication, and then trust that, okay, that's the right thing for the group overall. The success of team writing depends on the collective performance, and that interdependence, the goal of the value of interdependence is really the diverse viewpoints and ideas come together to make something that's, again, like the Beatles, much better than each of the individual parts put together. And that interdependency and the way they interact is what makes it so valuable. So in team writing, the collective document is, the final document is a collective effort, right? It's not a patchwork of individual art pieces, but a coherent work of art. So the quilt on the top represents the idea that each of those pieces are individually beautiful. You put them together, and there's sometimes some value and artistic qualities to a quilt, but they're not the same as having a shared vision like the tapestry on the bottom, right? We want to have a shared vision, shared voice, and that really requires true collaboration. So some of you have probably already been on teams and worked in teams, for many years, and some of you have only had a few experiences in teams. So some of this chapter is actually covering just good teamwork, but we're going to try and keep it aimed at what do we do for tactical writing. So in our tactical writing approach, right, tactical writing when you're doing a team, which is most of the time, results in a different approach to planning, drafting, and revising your documents. So far, you've been doing some tactical writing. You started with your objectives, you did your loop and whatever. That process, though, you didn't have to work with a bunch of other people. Now we're going to have to look at in terms of how that changes our planning, our drafting, and our revising. You want to commit up front to open and honest communication. Hopefully you're always honest when you're doing your communication, but openness and being frank with people is sometimes difficult for certain individuals. We're going to engage into a much more complex decision making and conflict resolution process, and we'll talk a little bit about that because sooner or later there will be both complex decisions and conflicts that you have to deal with. And come up with some strategies to help you understand how to negotiate different ideas, perspectives, and writing styles. So starting with the communication and feedback rate, again, the importance of open, honest communication is really critical. And a part of that, and we'll go through some strategies for feedback, is that you really want to have constructive feedback. This is crucial to the process. This is part of what makes a team really a team when it comes to writing, is being able to read and comment on what other people did, relate it to yours, and go back and take the constructive feedback you get from others and use that to revise your writing. And as you go to revise your writing, you want to think about the feedback as well as the overall document and voice. But it doesn't mean just doing what other people say. Constructive feedback gives you suggestions, but you have to negotiate the different ideas and perspectives and writing styles as you're trying to make this document, which sometimes means, well, the feedback said this, was a little too technical, and you might need to make that section. That's a comment I'll get all the time. You might need to make the section a little less technical, but you don't want to dumb it down to the point where it's lost all of its technical value, because if part of your audience is a technical person, you got to find part of it that relates to them. So you got to find this balance where you have your writing style and your voice move from being for everybody to a little bit more technical and then back to everybody. And in the end, the team members generally need to arrive at some level of consensus, but it's not a consensus about what everything should be. It's like, okay, I understand where you're coming from. And that's where the feedback and the feedback on the feedback play an important role in terms of how you want to handle that. You want to show them why it's happening. So it's not like a vote consensus. It's a discussion where you explain your point of view, you listen to their point of views, and then you go back and forth. And sometimes, in fact, in many organizations in all my companies, right, if we didn't reach consensus, and we didn't always reach consensus, then it was management's decision to make a decision about what's going to happen, which is a different, consensus by decree is a kind of a process. But at the end, you have to make decisions to move the document forward. So some of the benefits of team writing, general benefits of team in general, but the first of this is the quality of the output. A very good writing team will produce a much better document than almost any individual will. Not any, there are super writers, and those people might be able to do a better job than a team, but maybe not in the time frame and with all the skills that needed to make an entire tactical writing effort come out. Part of that quality of output comes from the diversities of ideas and viewpoints, a diverse group of thought, different personalities, and we'll get into that in a bit, allow us to better understand how this will land on different members of the audience. And there's some technological advantages and work level advantages. Some of your team might be much better at parts of the technology. Some will be good at the budget. Some might be better at dealing with Zoom. Some might be better at dealing with Zotero or references. Your team can actually use that when it goes to assign who's going to be working on what. So again, our goal is to sort of improve quality of the output, which that draws in the collective skills and the commitments. And another part where the commitments come in is people often have multiple things they have to do. It's rare to have a team where everybody is 100% focused on the writing project. And so you get to pull in people with skills for their piece and then work that into the overall end product to make it better. And the goal is benefiting the entire organization. And while there is a division of labor with a team, different people are doing different things, it's not about the division of labor. It's about bringing in collective skills and diverse viewpoints and putting that together. And so those diverse viewpoints generally come from having diverse thought processes, diverse personalities, diverse backgrounds on your team. So diversity here is not just racial or gender, although those can be important backgrounds. It's also, again, personality type. It's whether or not they have a technical experience independent of their personality type, how they relate to the target audience, and how they relate to the company's objectives. So this intellectual diversity, thought diversity, is a very important part of what you're looking for. This allows them to be more sensitive to a wide array of audiences, and it's much more than a single writer can generally achieve. Although you can sit there and try and sort of channel a particular personality type or channel a particular audience member, it's much easier for somebody who naturally sees the world that way because they're more of that way. And so that's part of what you want to be able to do. And it doesn't mean that all of these people are writing, but they'll all be part of the tactical writing team, and we'll come back up how we're going to work some of that in. And as I said, there's some technological advantages. There's a lot of collaboration tools. Some people will be much more tech savvy and can help team members with some parts of that. I've been on teams where people struggle with, well, how do I get this reference to add to the bibliography, or how do I get this tool, if we're using a new tool they're not used to, like Google Docs, and they're used to Microsoft Word, how do I do some of this collaboration stuff? And that overall produces more efficient processes. And then there's some other technological advantages where, using Zoom and Teams for video calls, things like using automatic transcription from Teams to actually capture elements, obviously email, messaging systems that allow us to share information. This is not just about making working in a team better. Some of these just make working better because, like, the automatic transcription is saving information that is useful, and sometimes you can actually use the direct results of that in the process by converting it. For example, you could take a transcription and use ChatGPT to summarize it and put that into part of the document. There's going to be some things we have to talk about in terms of leadership and team skills, where you as a team member have to understand that leadership for team writing is a little bit different. And in many organizations, the process and leadership of a proposal is not the same as the standard sort of hierarchy of who reports to whom, because especially for proposals, but for any large tactical writing within the company, it may actually need to pull people in a more sort of functional cross-functional organizational structure to pull people in. So there'll be a project lead or a proposal lead or editor, or whatever you want to call it for that particular project, and they might actually have people who don't normally report to them working on this project, and then you often have to negotiate that. So for you, if you're joining a team, right, there's the chance to explore different roles within a team, which can be beneficial for your career goal. They can help you have a better or holistic understanding of the project. One of my past PhD students, when he went to work for PayPal, one of the first things they did is they put him on multiple different tactical writing teams within the organization, working on sort of business proposals from within the company. And that role of working across many different things gave him a much deeper understanding of the project, but also of the company as a whole, because he worked on many of them. And then there's this idea of role rotation, where sometimes, even though the person who is the most skilled is not chosen for a project, part of that is because organizations sometimes really want to have people develop their skills. So if we look at this from an active learning and skill development, right, working on a project is a way of improving your learning. You can hone your skills and acquire new ones. And when you're working alongside colleagues that have different expertise and they might have more experience, now you can be a more junior person leading an effort or leading a particular section of a document, for example, and then it gets reviewed by a more senior person, so you can see and learn from them, but you don't have to have the senior person's really adding a lot of value. You're getting value both from the work you produce, but also from your learning. And that idea of embracing learning from each other on a tactical writing team is really important, because if you want to help your organization grow, you want the best skilled employees within your organization, so you want to do that. When you're doing this, you want to be careful to make sure you're fostering a positive work environment. If you want to have multifaceted, multicultural interactions across different parts of the company culture, you really want to have some part of this formally pushing out that process to have a collegial atmosphere that can contribute to a more enjoyable work environment for everyone. And at the heart of that is really good communication. But sometimes you want to go a little farther than just assuming the team will communicate. I've been in kickoff meetings for company proposals with some of the companies I've worked with, that we actually have a kickoff party right after, or once or twice, was actually right before we held the first technical meeting on the proposal and talked about where we're going to go. And the idea was to build a community and have this sort of collegial atmosphere. In the company that I was just mentioning, right, it was actually, there was a company but pulling in people from 3 different universities who don't normally work together. So they wanted to get us to understand this environment and have a better understanding of each of the people before we got into the actual proposal process. So this is a chance where you get the sort of potential for organizational growth because you're going to contribute to these contributions are crucial for their overall success, and you really want people to have a sense of ownership among the employees, among the team members working towards this. And if you do this well, the team writing becomes a thing where normally people who don't interact, technical members and business members who might normally not have much interaction, get a sense of friendship and camaraderie that contributes to the company's longevity because now they have a better understanding of how each of those organizations work, understanding the value those people bring, and that can affect the organization's bottom line overall, the more efficient processes. And if this is done well, this reaches this idea of having a collaboration mindset within your company, where you really want to have this idea of collaboration. Tactical writing becomes a natural place to do it, but again, this is a general team thing, right? Effective teams that have this collaboration mindset that are really focused on making more, better, improved ideas and stories from the tactical writing point of view, and that really values the overall collective output rather than the individuals, right? And if that becomes embedded in the DNA of a company culture, then you have a company with a collaboration mindset that fosters communication, learning, innovation, and profitability, and that is really good for the company's long-term profitability and growth. You don't want to have cutthroat things where people are trying to advance as persons more than advancing the company. It'll still happen in companies, but you really want this collaboration mindset, and you want to be able to reward it. And one of the ways to help build that is through effective tactical writing teams, because again, they build this cross relationships in companies that do 360 reviewing, where you get reviewed by multiple people from across the organization. As soon as you're on a multidimensional tactical writing team, you bring in reviews from other people that can really be valuable for the company's point of view. So now let's go look at the types of writing and then the styles of collaboration they're going to go for. So if I'm talking about a team, that means there's multiple people. There's a number of different ways that we can really talk about how we're going to use those people. And there's really 4 ways and then a couple of combinations. So the first one is sometimes called one for all. It's straightforward. One person writes for the team. This generally provides for good stylistic consistency, but limits the diversity of ideas. This is pretty common when what you're looking for from a tactical document is very short. We use this all the time in many of our collaborations where one person kicks it off, and then we're going to go through the reviewing process, and we'll come back to that in a bit. That makes it more than just one for all. So it's not one for all and no one else ever sees it. That's pretty uncommon for a tactical team because it would not be a team. The second approach is each in turn or each in sequence. The 2 different terms get regularly used for this, where basically one person starts as part of it, then they pass it on to somebody else. This is particularly useful for asynchronous teams, but it obviously can introduce bottlenecks. When the sections are clear enough and you want to have them build on each other, the nice thing about each in sequence or each in turn is if you have the time to do it, and then what you end up with is, since each person gets to read what the previous person did, they get a more consistent document out of it. The alternative is sort of all in parallel, everyone writes simultaneously on their discrete units. This is efficient, but generally requires a very well-done outline of who's doing what, and we'll talk about doing some of that. And it tends to produce a document that has more issues with voice and not as well structured. And so it's not as common to see it this way. Again, it's not a bad start for parts of it, and the most common thing we'll get to is the hybrid in just a second. The last one, which again is, I've been involved in many projects that do this. Some people call it all-in reaction or real-time team writing, right? In my view, I like to call it real-time team writing, where basically the team gets together in a room and you write in real time. Generally, there's one person at the keyboard and you're looking at the document on the screen. This more generally supports consensus because you're all in the room, whatever. It can lead to chaotic development. I found this particularly effective for shorter things instead of larger things, because in large things it just takes too much to watch. It's not an efficient use of 8 people's time when lots of the document can be put together and then used in the next one, which is multimodal or hybrid. And I would actually guess that most of the documents that I've been involved with in terms of team writing are all hybrid, where you combine elements of some or all of the styles. And for larger projects, this is what really allows you to leverage advantages of some people. You get some stuff going on in parallel, and then mitigate the disadvantages because you still do things to sort of pull it together. So not uncommon thing is to do the one for all, where somebody writes the draft, and then you get back to all for one, and you get in real time, and you all sort of either in parallel write on it or in sequence write on it, but everyone is going to give feedback, and then you're going to iterate a couple of times. So you do a little loop of one for all and all for one, and say that a few times, and you show up in a movie or something. But you're gonna go through this process. But you can also do all in parallel, combined with real-time reviews, right? So the last place, and a great use of larger numbers of people in team writing, is team reviewing. So one of the companies I've worked with a lot, right, we'll have maybe 3 people writing the proposal. The last one I just did with them, which we just heard was successful. There were basically 2 of us writing it. 3 if you count the budget person. When we get to that, we'll talk about the budget process. So 3 people worked on it, but then we had a review team with 9 people, right? So we get all these different red team review processes and that give us feedback on things and bring out all of the advantages. But the red team reviewers don't spend near as much time as we spent writing them. The whole proposal was 90 pages, so there's a lot of stuff that has to go on. So even the red team reviews had some parts they focused on more than others, and we'll go through that in just a little bit. So when you're working on these teams, there's really different styles of collaboration, and this is something that when you get to doing your team charter, you actually want to think a little bit about how does your team want to collaborate. So communication or collaboration emphasizes clear communication. It's the best approach in my view for one for all and each in sequence, because it's really a small group of people in both of those cases, and the communication from one person into the next in each in sequence doesn't necessarily have to have everybody. You get a lot of individual things. Task-oriented collaborations focus on achieving specific tasks. This is a deal for each in sequence or all in parallel, where each person has a very clear part of the document. So somebody's doing the introduction, then somebody's doing the sort of core science piece, and someone's doing the budget and business analysis. And that works whether I'm doing it in parallel or in sequence. You're sort of dividing up the tasks. Network-oriented collaboration really leverages team members' skills and expertise. I'm not sure that this is the best for all in parallel, but it's better suited to all in parallel, where you're really leveraging different skills like you would in task-oriented. And to me, the difference between task-oriented and network-oriented is if you have a very clear-cut set of tasks, then it's task-oriented. And if you really just have a bunch of people and the team is continually updating who's doing what and what's going on, we'll see when we start talking about assignments where that might come in, where it's a little bit more fluid and the workload might shift between people, then you're a little bit more in network-oriented, because they each have skills and expertise, but it also depends on their time, and so they might pull somebody in or out. And then community collaborations, where you build a sense of community and shared purpose. This is an idea for all-in reaction, multi-mode, and red team reviews, where you are trying to build the sense of community. As I gave the example earlier, right? Sometimes building that community is also about building the community, and the team writing effort is part of it, but this is a way of sort of saying that we're going to build this collaboration because we're going to be working together. We did this, for example, for a large proposal where we had multiple universities in a company, and we knew if we were successful, we're going to be working together on delivering the final product for the next couple of years. So we wanted to build that community orientation. So even though the all-in reaction or real-time writing is not the most efficient way to get started, we use that because it actually helped build the community so that later on we'd be in a better position as a community for what we needed to achieve. So so I have 10 tips to help you be more effective at the interpersonal interactions in teams. Many people struggle with the team side of this. This is not really writing. This is absolute standard team stuff. So the first is you want to build trust. So establish trust for open communications. If people don't trust you, then when you say something or they might not say something to you because there's this level of trust. As part of that, you want to be engaged in active listening, which helps validate members' contributions. If you don't know what I mean by active listening, it means when you're listening to the person, you're not really trying to think about what you're going to say next. You're not going to try and interrupt them to say, oh, no, but. Right? You want to listen, and if something good comes up, right, you want to, when they're done, you want to basically say, yes, understand, say something that helps you make it clear you understood what they were talking about, and then maybe add something. So do yes and, where yes, summary and something new, right, is a better way of doing active listening. You do want to be mindful of team dynamics. You want to adjust your roles and processes as needed. Team dynamics sometimes naturally occur and change over time, which is why it's dynamics. Some people are more aggressive and assertive, and you want to understand if that's an appropriate role or not, and make sure you're adjusting to that as it goes through. If there are conflicts, you want to address this constructively, and generally you want to address them early. Conflicts tend to grow like a cancer and make things worse, so you want to nip it in the bud and cut it out and bring it up. And that means sometimes having a simple one-on-one conversation with whatever's causing the conflict on the side. Sometimes it means having a broader group discussion, but you want to get on that. You want to celebrate small wins, which can really boost team morale with small milestones. Oh, we're halfway through this, and we know the pink review was positive. We'll get to those kinds of things later. But use this as a way to celebrate culturally within the team some things. Be open to diverse perspectives. You want to encourage diversity of thought, and that diversity of thought might be uncomfortable for you in the beginning because you may not be seeing their point of view. And that's, if it feels uncomfortable, if you have a little bit of cognitive dissonance, then you want to think about why is it, and just don't react, because your emotional state, your internal guards go up. You want to actually be open to these and think about there's got to be some value to this. The person would not have said it if there wasn't a value. Dig in and try and find that, right? And part of that might be related to being able to show some empathy to understand and be considerate about other people's points of view. That's part of why you just want to be considerate. But almost always, if in a tactical writing team, somebody's saying something that you don't understand or you don't agree with, before you say why you don't agree, you should think about what are they going and what's going on with it. You do want to be transparent, maintain about the project status. When you're dealing with a proposal effort and management doesn't know what's going on, that's generally really bad. If you're having issues and you're not going to be able to meet some deadline, you want to communicate it with your team as early as you know. So if something is due to your team on Monday and on midday Friday, it doesn't look like you're going to get to it and you're not planning on work the weekend, then you need to communicate to the team that, Monday morning, I'm not going to be ready, guys. Let everyone else know what's going on. You want to share credit, acknowledge each team member's contributions, and be careful when you look at that. You want to have this attitude that I may have written this section, but I got an idea from Bob or from Nancy, and that was critical to this, right? This is a way of talking about the contributions, even though the workload may not be what's being acknowledged in the contribution. Contributions come in many forms. And then personally, you want to make sure you maintain a positive attitude, focus on solutions during setbacks. So when things go wrong, and they often do, you want to focus on how do I make things better and moving forward and having this positive attitude. Otherwise, you get into a negative spiral, and that generally leads to bad things happening. So now let's look at the sort of management of these large projects. So there normally are some specialized roles. As I said, within a company, there's often a project manager, which can be a project manager for the proposal effort, and very often that same project manager in the companies I've worked with becomes the project manager for the final project if it gets funded. So we do lots of proposals. A project manager for the proposal writing turns out to be the project manager for the system when it gets done. And the role of the project manager is a central point for communication and coordination. I've worked with project managers who did very little of the writing. It was just communication and coordination. And I've worked with project managers who do a large part of the writing. It can go either way. That's part of where the team comes down to later. In many of the projects to work on, there's an independent visionary. Very often these are like the CEO of the company or a vice president. So in those kinds of projects, they help define key elements and goals. Your tactical objectives often come from above the project manager, but they may be less involved in the day-to-day, but there's still some roles they're going to want to be associated with, right? In fact, the visionary probably helped create the project and assigned it to the project manager, so they have a very important role even before you knew about the project. And then there can be very special roles. The project manager is often a designated role of the organization with very particular and sometimes very unique powers because they're getting people from across the organization that don't normally report to them and getting the allocation of that time. Many companies track people's time. They have to say, okay, this person's getting 10% of the time is going to be budgeted to this contract number or this internal speed type or one other process, right? And that often means that the project manager has to work with the normal day-to-day manager of this person and work out a few things, right? And so they sometimes get designated depending on how important the project is, that they have the right to pull people off other projects, which is always a touchy subject in companies. But project managers might have that, or they might just be, no, you get what resources they're willing to give you. So one of the things that the project manager does is they're in charge of managing the task schedules, publicized deadlines and responsibilities, and we'll get to building that in a little bit. Generally, they make sure that meeting minutes have occurred to build in accountability and consensus. Again, this is one of the places where technology can really help, because if you can get your transcription from your meeting, then that is your meeting minutes, right? You don't have to do a lot of work to do it. They generally make sure there's a meeting agenda. Again, this is all standard team stuff, nothing special for writing. Email reminders, step in when problems occur to make sure things are happening. They might also deal with other documents like risk assessments and progress reports that are necessary for the organizational structure. So the project manager, as I said, is not always about the writing, it's about the project as a whole, and they may manage that. And it is not uncommon for companies to have multiple project managers. So a person deals with multiple projects at the same time, so a project manager might have 3 or 4 projects, 5. Or it might be that they have multiple projects, project managers, each doing 1 or 2 things plus a different job that's not project management. So they can go lots of different ways. So in this class, but in lots of the way we will look at things, sometimes these teams are formed top down. We'll get to the assignment process in a little bit. But no matter how your team gets formed, one of the things you want to do is to have this idea of a team charter. And if you're the project manager, my recommendation is you put this forward as in your first meeting for the team. If you're not the project manager, you ask them about setting up a team charter and maybe give them some reasons why they want to do it, where you really sort of define what are the team's objectives. What does success look like for the team? Notice the team objectives are not the same as the tactical objectives that the project is looking at. It may not be the same as the personal objectives, the personal goals for each person, but you should be talking about what are the team objectives. And so a successful submission of the proposal is not quite the same as actually winning the funding for a grant, for example. But when the odds of winning the funding for a grant is 10%, and I've been in teams where odds are even lower than that, right? You don't want to set your team's success as we win. If you did a really good effort and that's enough for success, then that's a better model of defining success, so you have more successes. But you also want to look at what are the personal goals for each person, and having this conversation early on can be useful because somebody might be assigned relatively simple roles over and over again, and they want to personally grow. So they need to bring that up during the sort of team charter so that, okay, here's the process by which they want to learn and have that happen. You want to get some idea of an individual commitment. How many hours of, how much effort are they going to put in? Will they be able to invest? So and this is important that it comes from the individual. You're telling somebody you're putting in 10 hours is not a commitment for them to work for 10 hours. Right? It doesn't work out very well if they're not willing to work. Right? You can assign them, they can build the hours, and not much work will happen. What you really want is an individual commitment. How much can they commit to? And so it's often the project manager's job to get those statements from individuals and then go back to their manager and negotiate that they get that much time to work on this. There can be a bunch of other information affecting individual performance. Maybe somebody needs to be able to have work at home on Tuesdays for this. They can do remote meetings. There might be issues about technology access or all kinds of things, right? Whatever that is, that should show up in the charter. You should have something in your team charter about how irreconcilable differences are resolved. There should be some conflict resolution mechanisms. These might start within the team and then work their way up. So it might be that if 2 people have what they consider irreconcilable differences, they have a conflict process where they meet together, or maybe they meet together mediated by the project manager, assuming the project manager is not one of them, or some third random party is chosen from the team. Come up with some processes, and there's lots of different ones, and you can Google to find many more of them. And it might be that if those mechanisms don't work, then you escalate it up, and it works up to the visionary or somebody higher in the organization to help resolve those. Very often, differences and conflict occur because of late work. So there should be something about in your team charter, what is late work? What is it? How do you handle these missing deadlines? What happens? One of the things that's important when dealing with teams in general is not for the certain individuals on the team to step in and cover the late work of other people. I actually had one of my past employees from my lab and from my teams who went to work for Lockheed Martin, and he was on some project and he was the yeoman who jumped in and made it successful to meet the deadlines because other members weren't. And while they congratulated him for his performance, they also told him, don't do it again. You're enabling people on the team to have late and bad quality work because they know you will cover for them. This is an important part, especially when you're a student working in this, is to learn how to manage this. And if somebody has a deadline and they don't handle it right, you can't just jump in unless management asks you to. So you don't just do it, right? If you want to say, I can cover it, you can have a conversation with the program manager, the team lead, or whatever farther up the chain, right? And say, I can do this, but I need you to tell me that I should, because I'm going to rearrange stuff, right? If you're doing this person's work, two things are happening. They're not doing their work, so what else are they doing? And what are you not going to do so you have the time to be able to put this in? And they got to make sure that that's an acceptable trade-off within the company. And then there's going to be some related to late work is also unacceptable quality of work. So you have to have some guidelines for maintaining quality and what that'll happen. And we'll talk about that again when we come back to reviews. So how do we actually, so this gives us a charter. And again, it's often very short. If you get involved, sometimes people have multi-page documents. Normally it's pretty short, but you want some of this written down so that it's clear what's happening in, especially with respect to the individual commitments and the sort of conflict resolution mechanisms. You want to have that as an open and discussion among everybody so that they understand what's going to happen. So one of the ways within the process of sort of managing projects is a general project management tool again, but it's been used in a couple of the companies I've worked with for writing assignments for tactical writing teams, is this idea of a RACI matrix, sometimes called a RAM matrix. And RACI stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed. And really the idea here is this is about, for large projects, how do I make sure that there's different levels at which people have to be involved, but not everybody is at the same level. So we talk about the responsible person, and the responsible person is really the doer of the project. They're the one who's got to do most of the work. And then there's the person who's accountable. And you might think the responsible person is the accountable, and sometimes you can actually use both letters. But the accountable person is responsible for overall success for some task. And there's someone who's accountable for the entire writing project, but parts of the project might have somebody else who's accountable for making sure that happens. And then there are people who are consulted. These are experts whose opinions are sought and used generally by the responsible person to help make what's going on. But those are actively sought because they have particular skills. And then there's somebody who's informed. For example, the visionary is often just informed about where things are and status and what's going on. And to me, one of the big differences between responsible, they're doing the work, accountable people know what's going on, and they often check up proactively with the responsible person. So the accountable person is sort of like polling, every couple of days, where are we on this, what's going on, they're about that. Consulted people don't have any role until somebody asks them a question, right? And then they have an important role to answer those questions that in terms of the opinion and get it in. So when you ask a person who's consulted, you're expecting an answer. For informed people, you're giving them information and you may never get an answer. So you don't wait for them to have an answer. That's the difference between informed and consulted. Informed people, you're giving them a status update, you're sending them a draft. If you hear back from them, great, or probably not, they want something fixed. And if not, then you just keep moving ahead. I actually had a very large project I was working with for SOCOM, and we actually treated them as though they were informed, and we informed them stuff multiple times in terms of our progress, and we heard nothing back for like 6 months, and we're billing $100,000, $200,000 a month on this project, and we wanted to make sure we're going. So eventually, I was able to get a hold of the person, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this is what we meant when we said informed, right? We looked at what you're doing. You're doing great. We have all these other fires to fight. We weren't going to be bothered. You guys are doing great. Just keep doing more, right?" That's an ideal informed person. They were seeing what we're doing. They quickly looked at it and said, "Yeah, this is exactly what I want," and they just moved on. It would have been nice from a management point of view to make us feel a little better, to let us know, yeah, it's good, but that's not everyone's personality, and you can't expect them to do that. So just here's an example. We'll go over how to do it very quickly in the next slide, but actually I'll just do that here. If we think about our RACI example, we basically have a bunch of tasks. So these are tasks that might happen for a writing project where somebody's setting the opening stage for the introduction. There's a big picture, almost a graphic that somebody's going to be building. There's a challenge section where we're talking about what is the problems, the difficulties, our technical solution to the problem, a business solution, the sort of what's going on, how does it impact broader business, resolution, conclusion, budget, justification, core story elements, right? And then a review of the application. And here we have different people. So we have Anne, who's our project lead, our project manager, John, who is in engineering, Natasha's in business, Steve is in our art department, Sarah's an external expert that we're going to bring in with respect to certain aspects of the sort of grant process to make sure we're doing things right. And the visionary is Allison, right? So they put it together. So when we go to do this, right, we're looking at opening and setting a stage. This is really setting the foundation of what's going to happen, right? Anne is the project lead. She's the person who's accountable. But really, in this particular effort, probably Anne, but maybe Anne and Allison got together. Natasha and Sarah were assigned to be the responsible parties. So you can have somebody outside your organization who's responsible. In this case, this is actually not uncommon for grants, where there's somebody who outside who you bring in as an expert because they know this organization or they know this process, and they're going to help make sure you're doing everything right. Then we have our next one, which is our graphics, a big picture, where we have, again, Allison's now responsible. Part of the visionary is responsible. They have to make sure that this is a place where they wanted to have feedback. And then Steve is doing the artwork, and everyone else is either consulted when they need to, or informed, depending on making sure that we've captured the engineering thing right, and that we've captured what Sarah thought was the audience's understanding, make sure that this drawing is understandable. But really, Steve and Allison are working together to actually make this drawing happen. Steve's doing most of the drawing, and Allison's gotten less of the visionary. And then I'm not going to go through all of the examples, but for each of these rows, right, you'll see that sometimes we have somebody who's accountable and somebody who's responsible. This next line is actually the next two, right? There's no R. So what do you think happens in a matrix when there's no R? Well, so this is a shorthand, and I could have done this, but because of one of the organizations I worked with, if there was no R, then the person who's accountable is also responsible, because they're accountable for making sure it's done. So in this sense, John was both accountable and responsible. Not always the best project management process, but if John's got enough credible history to deliver, then the project manager can say, yeah, just keep me up to date and go make it happen. The same is true with Natasha on the business side, where you just assign and go make this part happen. It's common in organizations not to try and over segment when you don't need to. So John can pull in Natasha, Steve, and even Allison if they need to, but John's going to make this section happen. Natasha's going to make this section happen, right? And then here for the resolution conclusion, Anne's in charge, but again, they've brought in Sarah to help rewrite that to make sure it really resonates with the customer, kinds of things like that. So a lot of detail in this particular example for technical writing, but I wanted to sort of make it happen. And then you'll notice for the last category, for budget, I forgot, Natasha's in charge of the budget, right? Allison's responsible. Everyone else is actually just informed, right? And we'll come back to budgets maybe in another class. Another chapter. In the review process, you can sort of, Allison's accountable to making sure the reviews are happening. Anne is actually leading the reviews, and John through Sarah, everyone else is consulted. This is a team review. There might actually be 4 or 5 other people that aren't even on the chart, and their only role is that they are consulted or they're part of the review process. That's not an uncommon thing we'll get to. So when we go to do these things, right, so by having this nice structured approach of who's assigned what, and again, I did this for tactical writing projects, but this is a general project management skill. This helps clarify roles and responsibilities, know what's going on. This enhanced communication gives you a feel for who's doing what. And part of this is also about sort of risk elimination. You want to make sure you reduce scope creep and budget overruns by allocating, and although I didn't do it in this, it's not uncommon to have this where you actually put in hours or timelines or both, like how many hours is this expected to take each of the people. And then if they start seeing something's getting wrong, then the project lead can pull in things or help understand what's going on. The scope creep is important to make sure the project doesn't keep adding other things to go on. And if it does, you've got to go back and reassign it. Now, it's not always, not always, in fact, I would say less than half projects I've been involved, maybe a quarter of them have used something as formal as this. Um, so if you're in an organization, so in my own company, where we did some formal stuff, but after a little while, it became, we all were good at what was going on, and it was like the same thing as last time. So we didn't make a new Racky matrix, we did RAM matrix, we just keep going. So if your team already has good communication skills, they work together, there's no need to have something this formal. Small projects, things you might spend longer on making the Racky assignments than doing the project yourself. So and if you're going to do a one for all followed by an all for one review process, you only have two rows, then it doesn't really matter. You don't want to do this. So, and I already went through building it. Basically, the hardest part of building a good Racky matrix is one of the most important parts of project, which is planning. You got to figure out what are the demands, who are the stakeholders, what are the key activities, tasks, and deliverables, and once you've done that, it's easy to make rows in Excel to just make that happen. That sheet I showed you was actually an Excel sheet. And then you're going to figure out who are the people, list all the individuals, groups, and columns, assign project roles, right, for each task. Then you're going to talk about the part where you can spend a little bit more time and energy is having a group review where everyone sort of chimes in on the roles and what they're going to do. And then you have an ongoing process where every now and then you have to update this. So this is expensive because you might have 8 people in the room discussing it, but it's also, again, coming back to this idea of team members buy-in. You want everyone to understand what the roles are and what's going on. And so for a reasonable sized project, these first 3 expensive activities, which are identifying the stakeholders, activities, tasks, and deliverables, because that's 4, right? You have to do that for the project no matter what happens. So I actually find putting it in the spreadsheet like a Racky matrix was actually helpful for me when I was running my company, because I could go back and look at it and say, did I miss something? In fact, one of the things that would often happen during the group review is somebody say, well, what about this? And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that deliverable milestone. And then you add it back in, right? So this is, again, part of the value of the team, which is I as an individual would start with the chart, but then the whole group would be feeding back to make it a much better chart. And sometimes people, this would be part of where they get to sort of relate back and say, actually, this time I'd really like to be more involved in the budget because I've never done that before. And I had that actually happen in one of our efforts. I had not assigned the person. I normally assign the normal budget person. Somebody else wanted to learn more about it. So you make the change in the matrix, and I made them both. I made the person who normally does the budget accountable and the person who wanted to learn about it responsible, and that became a great way for them to learn. Another even simpler form of Racky, again, which I've used many times, so the formal matrix is a little bit more. The more simple form, which I've probably used in more than half my efforts, is really lines at the beginning of the document for section assignments. This says who's in charge, who is responsible for each of the sections. And very often, in fact, I'll go farther. I'll actually have that and say, okay, who's responsible? Here's how many pages you get, 1 page, 2 page, 3 page, right? And then who's going to review it? So I put all of those together on one line. And this is suitable for shorter efforts, and it's enough. Again, you have got to deal with, and then on that same line, you might put when the deadlines are, right? So, the kickoff meeting, you take this, you go through this, it combines dates, page allocations, and who's doing what. It's not the formal matrix, but it's the same core information, just laid out differently. And if you only have 5 lines, 4 people, 3 people, it's good enough to make this all happen. Sometimes when I'm doing this, again, for the Racky matrix, although I showed it to you with colors for the assignments, we tend not to use the colors for the assignments. We use the colors actually as indicating the risk and status. Where are each of those different efforts? So like once a week for, if we have a 2-month window for working on a proposal or a project, we would use the color coding to make it easy for the visionary, Ellison in the example, to be able to look at it and instantly say, oh, we got some red going on down here that's at greater risk. Let's have a meeting and discuss it. And if everything is going well, then it's quick and easy to just look at it and see where it is. Risk is normally not just how long does it have something goes, like how much of risk is there of not meeting their deadline or having some problem. And that can be useful as a way to inform management what's going on. So the bottom line for Racky's got 2 parts. Assignment for the team so everyone knows what's going on, and then it's very useful also for keeping management updated during the development process because they can sort of see what's going on and who's responsible. Many companies actually have very formal structures for who's assigned, how many hours to what project, and there are tools for larger corporations that actually tie the sort of Racky assignment matrices into their actual project management tool, so you can sort of see how many hours are allocated to different people and whatever. For very large projects, understanding how to use this tool for assignments is an important thing. So now I'm going to switch over to what I actually think is one of the most important parts of team writing, tactical team writing, which is team reviewing. And this is where you're going to talk about sort of giving constructive feedback. And this is where most of the added value of a team comes, which is reviewers looking at stuff, thinking about it, and giving constructive feedback to the rest of the teams. And so this is a really important quality improvement on the document, but also a chance for continuous learning on the parts of the employees, the members of the team. So some guidelines, and we'll go through a couple here. So the first is be specific. Detailed comments are important for clarity. Point out which sentences are confusing, and this does not have to be, you don't have to solve their problem, because very often you don't know exactly what they're trying to say. There's no way for you to tell them how to fix it. So detailed comments are, these two sentences are confusing. And sometimes you can actually just do it with the circles, like these were confusing, couldn't understand what you're talking about here. If there's word choices or things that are broken, right, sometimes you can suggest a fix, and sometimes you just point out where they are. Always focus on the work product. Critique the work. Critique the document, never the person. This is part of what means to be constructive. The argument is about the document, right? Don't say, I didn't understand you, because that's a personal statement. Say, I didn't understand this argument. Don't say, you made a weak argument here. Say, the argument could be made stronger with more evidence, right? This is actually giving some ideas where when you can explain why you make the comment, give it. But again, don't talk about it from a personal point of view. Even better, don't even think about it from a personal point of view, because that tends to, whenever you're critiquing someone, that tends to lead towards resentment and interpersonal difficulties. Where if you're critiquing the work, it's about how to make this better, what's going on here, then you don't have personal feelings going on with this. Okay, be timely, provide prompt feedback. Very often organizations will have a timeline, but if you can give them feedback within the first few days of receiving a draft, everything is fresher in their head, it's easier to do. So even if they give you a week for a review, if you can get the review done in the first day or two, that will actually help the person a lot more than waiting till the day before it's due or the day it's due and turning it in, or the day after for some of you. When you do want to say something negative, do what we'll call the bad news sandwich, which is positive, negative, positive feedback. So, at a high level, something might be like, you have an engaging intro, but you can improve the conclusion, overall well-researched. Clearly, that's like three, very high-level comments, so maybe not the best example, but it's like, for a section, it might be, the intro to this section is really good, but, the final sentences sort of lost me. I didn't find the connection to the next, and then, find a way to put positive spins on both of this. This does two things. Very often when people are giving feedback, they're only saying about the negative things. Being encouraged to every time you say something negative, say two positive things, helps them understand when they have to make changes, because very often you have very tight limits. If I have to take something out, things that people didn't comment on as positive are more likely to be edited down than things that people said were good. So saying good, bad, good gives you two things to keep and one thing to work on. And also another important thing there is to try and encourage dialogue. Don't view this as, I'm going to throw this over the wall and they have my feedback and I'm going to ignore it. Sometimes for those who are informed, if they give feedback, that's the way you have to interpret feedback from people who are informed, because they're not right. But somebody who's consulted, right? That's somebody who you can actually ask questions and get feedback from, and expect when they give you feedback, you can ask questions and then get, comments on the comments. If the comment is not clear enough, ask the question. You don't want to spend time trying to fix something only to find out you did not understand the question. And this is an important part of any feedback process, any learning process is not sure, ask those questions. So when we go to look at the feedback, now we've talked a little bit about what we should be doing, but we can also look at what are sort of the elements of the review process that we want to be looking at. So when we're going through the review, and we'll talk in just a little bit about some more structured parts of the process, but I actually strongly recommend having multiple passes. Many people read the entire document and they mark up everything at once, and that's not necessarily a bad thing to do, but sometimes it can be helpful, especially when you're beginning or in your particular roles, to focus on something. So focusing on the story. What is the alignment of that story with a tactical objective? And this can be important because the story might be spread over bits and pieces. And so if I'm reading sentence by sentence, word by word, right, I might lose track of the story. So I want to actually have, and I'm going to recommend a checklist where I think about, have I reviewed the story? The next is the content, right? Have I reviewed the content? Is it accurate and relevant, right? And if the data is not accurate, I should fix it. If the data isn't relevant, we should be deleted, and then I can make those kind of comments. And if the data isn't verified, if there's no reference, so it may not be credible, then that's another part of ensuring accuracy. Ideally, I would go check its accuracy, but if nothing else, I can say, where's the reference? And then somebody can figure out where to put that in. And again, when you're dealing with space constraints, it's often they know the answer, they just didn't put it in because they don't have enough space, and that might be the answer you get back, and then it's okay, right, if it's referenced someplace else. Format, checking for consistency, readable formats, uniform size, margins, right? Again, a very common part of the review process, and as somebody who's had multiple proposals returned for non-compliance, including once where we had bad formatting, right? We used the wrong format from a year prior where we had the wrong margins, and it was returned unreviewed. It's a lot of wasted time. You want to make sure all that's in there. Again, if you do that when you first set up your documents, you can make sure all that happens, and you don't have to check it every time. You want to make sure that somebody is being checked for structure, looking at how the organizational logical flow of this. Do you have enough bullet points and headers to make it clear, but not so many that you're wasting space? The language, review for clarity and appropriateness for the target audience. Avoid overly technical language when you're not aiming at a technical audience. There are actually tools, for example, if you use Microsoft Words, and there's others if you use other tools, that will actually estimate for you what's the reading level of your audience. And if you're aiming for people, often you want to aim maybe at 10th grade, even though you think they might have 12th grade, right? But if you're aiming for people who are viewing, part of your goal is to make sure they view is technically competent, then you can put in the technical language and aim at college level reading. And then check regulatory compliance. Whatever there is, if they say you have to have things, again, I've had a proposal reviewed because we missed a required section on dealing with human subjects, right? And all we had to say is this project has no human subjects. But because there was no section that said that, our proposal was returned without further review because it did not address the question of human subjects. Whatever the regulatory compliance are, you want to make sure all of those things are done. You want to make sure your references are accurate and they're current. Make sure that you're not citing old stuff that's too old, or you're just citing a URL that might be dead. Check your terminology and style. Again, this is a sort of how does it read. And then if you have elements, you want to make sure you check for user friendliness. This would be making sure the clarity of instructions, label of tables, figures. I actually strongly recommend having checking for people who have certain disabilities, right? So can it be read by a screen reader? I actually do much of my reading with a screen reader, so I'm particularly sensitive when somebody sends me a document that my screen reader cannot read aloud. And it annoys me. So as a reviewer, I'm in a bad mood. As soon as I'm in a bad mood, the rest of it doesn't go so well, very often, because I'm now more critical. But like, for example, doing some of your graphics, if you use red and green to separate two curves, then somebody who is red-green blind, which is the most common type of visual disability for color, they can't tell the differences. So you sometimes want to have somebody go through and just sort of do an accessibility or disability checking of a whole bunch of your documents in terms of its user friendliness. So those are some things to look for in the reviews, and not every person does every one of those. In fact, not every one of those happens every time because doing multiple reviews, well, this would be expensive. So many companies, and I actually don't know the full history of all the colors. I think Red Team started dealing with red from, in the military, people pretending to be the adversaries and go through this. But the rest of the colors, I'm not sure where they came from because it may be green. So we have what are called color-coded reviews, and these are extremely common. I've worked with dozens of companies that have all used exactly the same terms. So they're well established, and so you should know these terms. They will show up in exams. So first is the blue team. And the blue team review is, and I'll get into these in more detail, but so maybe I'll just skip to that. But we have the blue team review done very early, basically at the template level. Pink, which is about halfway, a little more than halfway through. Red team, 85 to 90% complete. and then the gold team is the final 100. Everything should be done. Obviously, if they find mistakes, you go back and edit it, so maybe at 99. But it should be pretty much ready to go when it gets to the gold team, and then they make minor things. And then the green team, although I've shown them here in a linear line, and it's not uncommon for us to do the green team late. We actually do the budget early, and then somebody's got to analyze the budget. So the green team is almost always done in parallel with the red team, pink team going on, right? It doesn't get to the gold team until both the red team and the green team sign off on it, and then it's gets a few more iterations, then it gets to the gold team. But the green team is all about money, which is probably why it's called green. So again, the prerequisites for the blue team is somebody has made the proposal template document with rules and sections. And so that is almost always done by a person. Sometimes it's two, but generally it's one or two people take whatever the call for proposals are and turn it into a template document. And that template document then has all the rules and sections abstracted out. There might be 2 paragraphs in the call for proposal about the rules. The template document will probably have a 1 or 2 sentence reduction and a pointer to what section to go read at if you need more information. The point of the blue team is to establish a strong foundation for the team, and so that everyone who's involved, so everybody who's going to involve is going to be the proposal managers, the section leads, whoever's leading those part of the efforts, and the subject matter experts who might be called in. Anybody who is assigned, anybody who's responsible, and generally anybody who's consulted would be part of this review so they understand what they're going to do. The review details for the kinds of things I would be looking at this is 1 to 2 hours with 2 to 3 pages of feedbacks of things that need to be happening. This might be actually where this blue team review is not uncommon for us to also have this be where the assignments happen, where we might be assigning sections in a cybersecurity proposal to who's going to be doing what if I have multiple subject matter expert SMEs, who's doing what part of it, might be figuring out what's going on. Often, in my view, the visionary and the proposal lead has probably also spent some time on the main storyline and objective, but if that has not already been decided by management, then this blue team review is actually where this happens. And that's why it can take 1 to 2 hours, because you're going to do a little bit of brainstorming on what are the main storylines. We might have the 1-sentence preliminary story, but there's a lot of things we can put together to figure out what's going to go on. Before people go off and start writing, you want to know what that story is. So you're going to put all of that together. And I'm not sure what happened here. Oh, so we should have had a pink, this is the pink team review. But the title's missing. So the pink team is reviewing the narrative and the details so far. It's generally 2 to 3 hours, produces a couple pages of feedback. And again, the proposal manager, writer, SMEs, and this time a group of separate initial reviewers who are not from the writing team are part of this. And the goal here is to ensure substantial content in the technical manual, in this case is heading to target, whatever the document is. We have enough content, it's on target to where we're going to be going, it's consistent with the stories, and give some feedback of where things are developing. And again, this is normally you're at like 60, 65%. You want to get this feedback while you still have plenty of time to change things and make things work, so you get a feel for how it's going. Depending on the size of the project, this might be done 2 to 3 weeks before it's finally due, so you have enough time to work on it. And when I say 3 to 5 pages of feedback, right, very often these are not separate pages of feedback. They're comments embedded with the document with maybe a page or half a page of high-level comments from each of the people who are involved. The most common process I've seen with this is we actually first get the document, do a read through the document where we embed a bunch of comments, and then we have the 2 to 3 hour meeting to have a discussion of where it is and where it's going. Smaller efforts, if we're talking about like a 20-page tactical document that we're producing, it's more like an hour to 2. We tend to have pink reviews more commonly only when we have very large projects, so we're looking at something when we're done, it's 100 pages. And so I'm going to spend some time, whenever I talk about time for these reviews, right, this is not the time it took me to read it or listen to it. This is the time it takes while we're in the meeting. But if you're talking about a 100-page effort, there's a lot of things to talk about, and so it takes a good bit of time. The green team review is focused on pricing and not just on pricing, although I call it pricing. It's whatever is necessary in the budget. And sometimes there are a bunch of detailed documents that have to be done in just the right way. And it's going to have 1 to 2 hours of time to make sure all that's happening. And again, you're going to get a bunch of individual comments and a couple of high-level comments. This tends to be the financial analysts, whoever is doing that, the proposal manager, and sometimes the technical lead. And you might be wondering, why is the technical lead in on the budget review? The real reason for the technical leads here is not that they have a tremendous amount of input, but there has to be a connection between what's stated in the technical sections and what's in the budget. In fact, when we get to the chapter of budgets, right, I actually do budgets before I do almost any of the writing, even before I get too deep in the story, because I have to know how much money I have to do things for the different parts I need to do, right? And that affects what the story is, how much time I'm going to spend in different elements. So the technical leads are there to make sure there's a level of consistency, understanding what level of personnel time for different aspects of the project are there, because it's got to be consistent. If the proposal readers say, and I've again been on review teams for the government where the proposal was amazing and it would have been a really great value, but it actually comes across as not credible because the budget is inconsistent with the work they're saying they're going to do. If they propose $500,000 worth of work and they have a budget of $100,000, then as a reviewer, that's really bad because it doesn't sound like they can do what they do. Either they don't know how hard it is, or they're going to not be able to deliver because those two things are broken, right? Or if there's a way that they're going to make it more efficient, they have to tell us that in the process. So that's where technical leads show up. They're not driving the budget, but they're there to check this consistency. So validating the cost estimates in a software development proposal is a common thing where I would have been involved as a technical lead, even if that's not the financial part of what I'm trying to handle. So the red team review, and you've seen this in prior chapters, because to me this is the one that's most important. If there is only one review, it's the red team review. And here we want to make sure we have compliance and clarity. We're checking for everything. This is generally, again, for larger projects, might be 3 to 4 hours. I guess you should have put some extra times. If this is, a 3-page document, it's an hour. And to produce, some range of feedback depending on the size of the document. This generally involves a bunch of people who are not part of the writing process. So there's senior management, proposal managers, key stakeholders. We've actually had some of these where we have external paid consultants who come in just to give feedback on this. And so part of this is if we're trying to make sure, let's say we're writing something where we're doing a training project, right? We want to make sure we're hitting the client's requirements. And that's where some of these external stakeholders might come. Somebody's got a little bit more experience with that stakeholder, making sure they think our modules are aligned with them. So large projects, the red team review is critical to make sure you're doing. Again, this is your 85 to 95%. And you want to make sure before you figure out if you have a limited space, which is common for lots of these technical writing efforts, you got to figure out how to prioritize what's going to fit. At this point in time, if I'm looking at say a 100-page proposal, it's 80 to 95% done, and it's 130 pages. We actually over because we tend to write stuff, and then it takes a while to focus it down and make it shorter. And part of the review here is giving this clarity: what's important, what's not, how do we make that happen in terms of where we're trying to go. And then the last thing in terms of reviewing is the goal team review. And in a sense, there's always a goal team review because somebody's got to submit this thing. This is the final checkpoint. Again, from a teaming point of view, we would often have some senior executives, business unit leaders, whoever is involved. It generally has a 1 to 2 hour time frame. And even if there's no changes, there's generally still some level of feedback or review of results. And one of the reasons for this, to capture some of this, even if you make no changes, if it all looks good, you want to have some level of review and feedback for the executives, one, so that they're on board and they understand what they're agreeing to, because you're making business decisions. And then the second is a feedback mechanism. So if they made some feedback, sometimes they'll be like, yeah, we don't have time to fix it. We should have done this better. Again, you don't go back and fix it, but you have to turn it in today. So you just make that happen. So you can learn a little bit more about your processes to improve your tactical writing team's processes. So they might also be looking at this and saying, okay, we got the right methodology, realistic budget, whole document is on target for the objectives. If you have enough time to make a set of revisions, even though it's 100%, then you go back and you do it again. You can make some fixes. And I've been involved in plenty of goal team reviews where on that last day we frantically make 8 or 10 things different. The goal team should have had somebody already give them a detailed checklist of what has been analyzed and what's not. You don't want these senior level people wasting a lot of time checking for formatting, but this is a place where the checklist will become useful. If they don't have one, then you don't really know for sure if you've covered them or not. So those are different colored schemes, and you'll hear those terms. Again, red team review is the most common, where you're sort of taking an almost adversarial point of view, making sure, what did you do wrong? What can we fix? But you also want to add positivity and don't view red team as just being negative. Okay, so we're now going to go through a number of tips for the review process, but again, to not make this video too long, we're going to go ahead and take a break. We'll come back to this go get some stretches, get a drink, come back, and we will continue on in just a bit.